My name is Donna Drum. I'm from Western Washington University. And if you would please, so that everybody can see what school you're at and also so that it'll be recorded. And just as a note, I know Zoom probably told you too, but this meeting is being recorded. If you would please go to your settings in the participants list and change your name so that it shows your school so we know where everybody's from. That will help Jennifer and Carol contact you as well. So Jennifer and Carol are going to be monitoring the chat. And I get very excited. Oh, Sarah B is saying there is no participants list. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not used to working in the webinar mode. Sorry. Okay, so Jennifer and Carol are going to be monitoring the chat. I get very excited and I talk very quickly. So if you have questions, just put them in the chat and Carol and Jennifer will stop me if it's appropriate or wait until I take a breath. So I teach at Western Washington University. I've used the eSUA, the eSUA 3 times. As one of the co-authors, I helped work on it over the last 2 years, I believe. And in fall, it was kind of in a beta mode. That went pretty well. But then now, because we're on a quarter system, I've used it twice this spring. And it's gone really, really well. We continue to make improvements. The support from Armin Dalton is obviously very impressive. And there are just a lot of resources that come along with this that we'll be showing you. So Jamie Bay is one of the other co-authors. He's having some technical difficulties right now. We were hoping he could show the student side because it was his idea that actually got this this idea going. Many of you are familiar with the paper eSUA that's been around for 3 decades. And Jamie had always used that. And he didn't like manually grading everything. And so with his Excel wizardry, for lack of a better term, he came up with a semi-automated solution for this. Armin Dalton heard about this and said, this is something that we can use to take the eSUA to the next level. And they asked me if I wanted to join on, and I said, well, heck yeah. And so here we are. I'm very, very excited about this product. As I said, I've used it 3 times. The students find it quite challenging, but they also admit that it is really a good thing. They can now see how everything fits together. And even though they struggle, they really like being able to see the flow and the things that I can do to help them as the instructor that actually I'm going to spend most of our time on today, has made it very smooth for me to help them. Okay. Just a couple things. Remember that, remember to stop me, okay? But I'll show you as we're going through. Every student can have their own individual transaction set, okay? Most of the information is going to be the same. The transactions are all going to be the same, but there are enough little tweaks that students can't share their information. So that has been really good too, because I strongly encourage my students to work together, but it's different enough that they can't just say, oh, on that check, yeah, just put in, you know, $5,250 there and that, you know, do it that way. I see Jamie's on. Jamie, do you want to do the student presentation or are you still having technical issues?
No, I think I'm there.
All right, go ahead. And if you have problems, just let me know. I'm all set to jump right in. I'm glad you're here, Jamie. This was your brainchild. I'm glad you get to do this.
Well, I apologize. I'm using an Apple computer with a virtual machine on it, and it didn't like that. So anyway, I'm here.
Technology happens. I'm just praying as well that the technology gods stay on my side and my internet stays up. Go ahead. I will mute myself now.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, so Carol asked me to present the student side, and then Donna's going to do the instructor side. As Donna had mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of Utah, and I have used the Systems Understanding Aid in my class for the last 10 years. And I really like the product, but when I first started using it, when I was first adopting it, I decided to go through the Systems Understanding Aid myself to get familiar with it. And I got about halfway through it, and I thought that that was really too much work for me. So I create a tool that the students still all of to do all the footing and cross-footing, those kind of things. So that, and now we took it, we originally had it in Excel, and then we transferred it up into this E version that you see here, which I think is really cool, but of course I'm biased. So this is what the students are going to see when they first open up their computer. They'll get to this dashboard, and then they'll enter in the version that they're using, hit the proceed button, and they're going to end up with a menu that's going to be on the left side of the screen, like you see here. And I just want to quickly talk about each one of the items in the menu, and then I want to take you through one transaction real quickly so that you can kind of see how it works. So the first menu item we have is the instructions, flowcharts, and references. So those of you that have used the eSUA should know that the eSUA is basically a way to take you through all of the required steps to record transactions in a set of books. So we start off with the document, then we enter it into the journal, enter it into the journal, and then we post that, sorry, we enter the journal, yeah, then we post that to the ledgers, and then we post it to a year-end worksheet, and then we post it from the year-end worksheet into the financial statements. This gives the students the ability to see behind the scenes all of the process that takes place to record an item into your financial statements. Unfortunately, today, as most of you know, that the students don't get to see this much because they record it into their electronic general ledger, and it just does all the work behind the scenes. And this allows the students to really go through every step of the process and understand how it works, so that when they're doing account reconciliations and they have to drill back down and figure out why things don't work, they understand the process and know where to look when they need to find that discrepancy. So that's where this is a really cool tool. I think it's something that really will and does help the students understand how the accounting works, so they can actually solve problems. So anyway, this is what they'll see. So we start off with the instructions. We have a page that has some videos on it for the students. They can review these videos to learn how to use the product. And then we also have some written instructions down on the bottom. The written instructions can either be downloaded by clicking on the download button over here, or they can use it as an ebook, which you have over here. Let's zoom in a little, and just treat it as an ebook, and they can do it either way. And then we have the project instructions, which is exactly the same as the hard copy book, except it gives you the instructions related to the electronic version, but it's pretty much the same thing as the hard copy. Again, you can download it, or you can use it as an ebook, as you see here. And then as you go through the project, each transaction has a flow chart attached to it. And these flow charts are what the students use to enter the transactions. And so the students will be using these flow charts on every transactions. So you can either use them as an ebook or download them, but the best way to use them is to download them, in which when I do my example, I'll show you how to do that. And that's the flow charts. And then this is really nice too. We have samples of all of the different documents and how they should be filled out. So again, we have it as a download and we have it as an ebook. So I'll just show you the ebook, but these are not documents that they're actually going to fill out. I mean, the documents they'll actually fill out, but what's in here is not. This is just examples of how a document would be filled out when they fill it out. So it's not the actual transactions themselves. It's just giving the students an example of how this would look if it was filled out. Okay. And so that's really nice. All of that, they give an example of the various different types of documents. And so the students can look at those. And then we have a reference book. And this reference book can either be used in an ebook format or it can be downloaded. The advantage to downloading it is if you download it, we have the index set up so they can just click and go right to the pages. So I just downloaded it. Let me just open it real quick. And so this is what it looks like on a PDF file. And then they can go to on the index, they can find what they want to look up. And they can then click on the page number and that'll take them directly to that page where they can study this. So the purpose of the reference book is so the students, if they don't understand a transaction, can go and look in the reference book where they can gain an understanding of the transaction itself. And that's where that index is very helpful, so they don't have to flip through all the pages. So that's the reference book. And then we go to the documents. So let me close that real quick. Then we go to the documents. So these are all of the documents that the students will use through the transactions as they go through the transaction. So the first document here is the transaction list. This gives you a list of all the transactions that need to be recorded. They'll go through this transaction list, and the transaction list will tell them what documents. Actually, the flow chart, it's the flow chart that tells them the documents. So between the transaction list and the flow charts, they'll open up one of these documents in here and then fill it out. Once they're done with the documents, they file it in a filing cabinet. So in the filing cabinet, we have a temporary folder. We have a folder for items that are mailed out to outsiders. We have a folder for banking, a folder for shipping, and a folder for accounting. And they just drag their transactions. Whenever they save a transaction, it gets saved to the temporary folder first. And then they just drag a transaction and drop it into whichever folder they want to drop it into. Okay. So that's the filing cabinet. This is the journal. So we have the general journal. And the general journal, they just enter the transactions. And they just hit a line here to enter a transaction, hit the plus button, and that enters it into this general journal. And then we have all of the specialty journals, and we have a specialty journal for sales, cash receipts, purchases, disbursements, and payroll. And I'll show you an example of how to enter into these journals as I go through an example of the transaction. So that's the journals. And then we have the ledgers. So we have the general ledger. And the general ledgers are collapsed when you first open them. To see the details of it, you click on the little pull down menu, and then you'll see the details of the general ledger. And this is where you would enter in a new transaction into the general ledger and then hit the plus button down below. And then we have the subsidiary ledgers. We have one for accounts payable, accounts receivable, employee earnings, and fixed assets. And then we have a specialty table where we have the employees and their pay. And it's basically a history of their pay. They will be entering an entry in this table when they receive their raises. We have a place for them to do their bank reconciliation. We have we're asking the employees to fill out basically an accounts receivable aging report, which is basically allowing us to see the aging, the students to fill out a report with an aging for each of the customers, so they can a tool that they can use to make sure that the accounts receivable is reconciling to the general ledger. And we just do that with accounts receivables. And then we have the year-end worksheet. This is where students will be able to do their year-end close or month-end close and record their adjustments to come up with the final numbers that are going to go into their financial statements. So what students will do is, once they're ready to do the final closing, they'll load their general ledger into this worksheet, and then they'll enter adjustments into the adjustments column from their journal entries. And then that'll give us the numbers that'll go into the financial statements. This creates a post-closing trial balance. And this trial balance will be showing both what's in the general ledger, what's in the worksheet, and telling you what the difference is. And there'll be a difference in this until you actually post to the general ledger. Once you post to the general ledger, this should go to 0. And so students can then make sure that their general ledger is correct. Then we have the financial statements. We have a balance sheet, an income statement, cash flow worksheet, and statement of cash flow. The cash flow worksheet is a tool that we've added to allow the students to build their cash flow, their statement of cash flows. And then we have a check figures. This takes a second to load up, but we have the check figures where the students can see if their numbers are actually tying to what they should tie out to. So we have a number of different check figures, and then we have a place for balancing to make sure that all of the journals and general ledger are balancing. And hopefully they're in balance when they start, and hopefully they're in balance when they're done. Okay. And then this is a really nice tool. We've added the hints where if students are wrong, they go into the check figures, they see that they're wrong. This will give students hints on where they're wrong so they can have a place to look. And from, in my experience from teaching this is the most difficult thing from a professor's perspective, because students can't figure out what's wrong, and then they come to the professor, and the professor has to help them figure it out. This kind of allows the students to actually do that on their own by going to these hints and finding out what's, what's wrong. And then we have a grading tool. It's the auto grading. So the students, when they're ready to submit their grading, they'll go to the auto grading tool. They'll click on that, and then it'll ask them, are you sure you want to do your grading? They'll click yes. I'm not going to click yes here because that'll eat up. They only have a limited number of submissions that they can make based on the way the professor set up the course. But if they hit yes, that's going to actually grade it and tell them the grade, give them an idea of the grade that they've received, and send it over to the professor to review and do the final grading, which Donna will talk about. So anyway, that's what's the students see. Now let's just quickly, let me first, before I do that, let me just open this up for questions. Are there any questions so far?
I think most of the questions are being answered in the chat right now.
You guys are answering those?
We are.
Okay.
It
All
would
right,
be
so
helpful too, I'm sorry, it would be helpful if we can put all the actual questions about the project in Q&A. just because it's hard. So, general comments or whatever, but do the Q&A. And then we also can have a printed out record of all the questions and answers at the end. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's run through an example then of how to use the items. I mean, how to use, do a transaction. So first of all, one of the tricky things about doing the eSUA, whether it's manual or doing it electronically, is the number of different documents you have to have open all at the same time. So if you're doing it manually, you're going to have, you need a big table and you need to be able to spread out the documents. So you have your journal, your ledger, the documents themselves, the flow chart, and the transaction listing. All this has got to be kind of open. And so there's some tools that we have that are going to help us do that. And I'm going to demonstrate those as we work on these documents. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to download our flow charts. So I'll click on the flow charts. And I'm going to go to the download. And that'll open a little window down at the bottom. And with the flow chart, I'm just going to double click that. That's going to open the flow chart. Let me close these other. Okay, so at the top, the student should have two tabs now. A tab that shows the flow charts and one that shows that menu on the left-hand side, okay? So that gives my flow chart. So the next thing I want to do is I want to get the transaction listing, and I'm going to download that as well. So I'm going to go to my documents. I'm going to go to my transaction list, and I'm going to click on the download button. Click on that. Again, it opens that little window on the bottom. And then I just click that. And that's going to open up the transaction listing. So now you should have the documents window tab. You should have the transaction listing tab and the flow chart tab. That's what the students will have. Now what we want to do is start going through the transaction listing. In order to do that, I want to dock this on the left-hand side of my screen so that all of the work that I'm going to be doing will be on the right-hand side of the screen. So to do that, I'm going to hold my, if you're doing this in a Windows computer, I'm going to hold my Windows key down and just dock it, hit my left arrow key and dock it on the side. Okay, so now I'm ready to start with the transaction. So I start off in the transaction listing. We're going to be doing transaction number 2. So this is a pretty simple transaction, and we chose it because it won't take us too long to do, but it'll give you a good idea of how this works. So the first thing we do is receive an email notification from the Bank of America, from First America Bank and Trust for an ACH payment for Branch College. Came from Branch College, okay? And it's in payment of invoice number 730. So now the student is going to find the flow chart associated with this transaction. So in the third column, you'll see the page number for the flow chart. So it's page 21. So we're going to go back to the flow chart and we're going to find page 21. And that's this page right here, okay? And we're doing the receipt of cash that Jim Adams is doing. So I'm just going to make that bigger so that we can see that well, okay? And then I'm just going to walk through the flow chart and we're going to do each step as we walk through. So this is an ACH, so we start here with the ACH. And the first step is to restrictively endorse the check, but because this is an ACH, there's no check to be endorsed. So we just go to the next step. And then we don't have a customer purchase order, so we're just down with the check of the ACH. So now we're ready to enter this onto a cash receipts pre-list. So what I'm going to do is go back to my documents section. So I hit the documents tab, and I'm going to go to the find in the list. I'm going to find the cash receipts pre-list. And then on the side, there's a little edit button. What the student's going to do is they're going to push the right mouse button on that little button, and they're going to come up with these options. Let me just tell you what they can do. So the first option is you can open the link in a new tab in the current browser, or they can open it the tab in a new window. That's what we're going to do. Or this is another really cool thing, depending on the browser that they're using, you can also open it on any device that's connected to your network. So if you notice on mine, I've got my desktop I could send it to. This is actually my, it's funny it says desktop, but actually that's my laptop. I have my iMac, I have my iPhone, in addition to my Windows computer that I'm actually working on right now. So I can actually send this document to any of those devices and use the screen on those devices as another place to put my documents. And so that's a really nice option that you can do as well. So if they had like a tablet, for example, maybe they have their tablet and then they have their laptop, and they've split their screen on the laptop, and then they put some of their documents on the tablet, and they can all be working simultaneously on these separate devices. But what we're going to do is we're going to open it up into a new window. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that new window. That's going to open up the transaction listing. And now I'm going to dock that on the right-hand side of my screen, so that I have that on my screen. Now, this is just taking up space, this menu. So I'm going to go, there's a little icon at the top. I'm just going to hide that, make that so I can see the transaction listing. Now go back into the transaction itself, and let's fill out the cash receipts ledger. So I'm going to come down to row 6. The date is the 16th, so I'll just type in December 16th. Okay, and the description is going to be branch college. So one of the things you can do is just copy paste. So I'll just copy the branch college, paste it in. And this is a payment for AR. So I'm going to click the AR box. Now this is an ACH, so there's no number. So I'm just going to type ACH in the check column. And the invoice number was given to us in the transaction list as 730. So it's in payment of invoice 730. And the invoice amount, we're going to have to find, look, I'm going to skip over that for a second, and I'm going to copy in the actual payment received. I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to paste that over here. Okay. And then I need to find what was the original amount of the invoice. So I'm going to come back to my documents in the left window, and I'm going to go to the ledgers, the ledgers, and go to the accounts receivable subsidiary ledger. And I'm just going to keep that in the same window. So that opens it up. Find branch college. And here's that invoice 730. So I'm going to copy the amount of that invoice and place it in my amount of the invoice column. Now you can see there's a difference between the two. And the difference is the discount that the customer took for paying it early. So we'll have to use that, calculate what that difference is when we enter it into the cash receipts journal. Okay, so that enters that into our cash receipts pre-list. So let's go back to our flow chart and see what's next. So we're going to move down, and now we need to make an entry in the cash receipts journal and in the accounts receivable subsidiary ledger. So the next thing we're going to do is go back to our documents, and we're going to open up our the journal. So let's open up our specialty journal. So that's the cash receipts journal. Now we want, the student is going to want to right click that, not click it, but right click it. And they're putting that into a new window. So I'm going to click on new window. Okay, so that opens up the journal, but I need to rearrange this in order to make this easier for me to enter everything, because I'm going to need 3 documents to enter the information in. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make these documents smaller. Then I'm going to take the cash receipts journal and I'm going to set it up on top here. Did I lose one of them? There we go. All right, so now I have the cash receipts journal at the top. I have my instructions on the lower left, and I have the cash receipts pre-list down on the corner at the bottom. That will now allow me to have the information I need to fill out the journal. Okay, so we'll start with, first of all, in order to enter something in the journal, we need to edit a line in the journal. So I'll click on the edit button. Okay, so this is the 16th. So I'm going to click on the calendar. I'm going to enter in the 16th. Okay, so this is Branch College. I'm just going to copy Branch College. Okay, now we don't put anything in the control column yet. That'll be entered when the reconciliation is done. So we'll come over to the cash. So the cash column is going to be the cash that we entered in our cash receipts pre-list. I'm just going to copy that and paste that into my cash column. Now I need to enter in the discount. And so I've got to calculate the discount. So I go to my calculator and calculate the discount, which is $33.12, 33.12. Okay. And then I need to enter in the amounts that's going to be posted to the accounts receivable subsidiary ledger. So that's my 1656 that I have in the pre-list. Okay. And then I save that. So I click the save button. And then I'm going to go up to the top and make sure I'm in balance. So up here, it should be 107,925, 107,925. So now I'm in balance. So let's say that the student had made a mistake and didn't enter in the 3312 for the discount, then this should be out of balance. And at that point, the student would have to figure out why it's out of balance and fix it down here. Okay. All right. So that's we entered that into the journal. Now we need to enter it into the enter it into back into the subsidiary ledger. So I'm going to drop down to the left corner again. This is the subsidiary ledger. I'm going to open up Branch College. And I'm going to edit the row below. This is going to be on the 16th. Oops. 16th. And it's in payment. It's an ACH, so it's an ACH payment. Okay, and then again, I'm just going to copy this directly from, I could do it from the ledger, I can do it from the transaction listing, either way. Okay, and then I'm going to save it. And now that's posted to the subsidiary ledger. So now we're going to go back to our flow chart. We can scroll down on our flow chart. And the next thing we do is store this, file these in the temporary file, or file the cash receipts pre-list in the temporary file. So to do that, I go back to my pre-list. I come down and I click on the save button, and that'll automatically save that in the temporary folder. So I go ahead and save it. And then we can go back to our list and open up the file cabinet. And now you should see the cash receipts pre-list filed in the temporary folder. Okay, so that's an example of how a student would use this to enter a transaction into the eSUA. So now I want to turn the time over to Donna to show you, yeah, I'll turn the time over to Donna to show you what the instructor side of this would look like. But before I do that, is there any questions?
One more thing, Jamie.
Yes.
Yes, hit the auto grade, please.
Oh,
I just wanted to interrupt you to make sure that you did that before you shut your screens down for them. Hit the auto grade so they can see what the students see, and then I will walk through when this student then comes to the instructor for help.
okay. So let's do that again. I'll go to auto grading, hit the yes. Okay, so once they've hit yes, this is what the students will see. It'll show that it's submitted. Well, this is showing a graded percentage as 0% because we haven't gone through the workbook or anything yet. But theoretically, they would be getting a grade here.
Yeah, that Donna, I don't know. She's not a very good student. Click on the hints if you would, please.
Okay.
And then I'll take over from there. I want to see the students' hints. And then because then I can relate it to what the professor sees.
Okay.
Okay, so this is what the students see. And notice how it's quite generic. Something is wrong with invoice 731 and or how you posted it to the sales journal. Okay, so that's the student side of it. So Jamie, if you release your screen, please, I will share mine.
Okay.
Okay, so this poor Donna person has now come to your office and said, oh my gosh, I got a 0%. What do I do? There are so many ways to help the students. And when we first started this, I was a little daunted because each student can have their own transaction set. And so even though the transactions are the same, the numbers are different. And how am I going to help the students? All of the solutions in here are using that specific student's data. So keep that in mind as I'm going through that, because that's key to what we're doing here. So here's Donna demonstration, and she's not a great student. So there are a couple things we can do. I'll come back to the view in a minute. We are going to look at the activities because that's where we'll see the hints that Donna has. Oh, and before I forget, there are reports over here as well. Reports that we can do the progress that each student has made to date and a final grading report. Those are in Excel and they're super useful, but they're probably the least exciting thing we've got going on here. So we have activities, and we'll start there for Donna. This practice session is set up as a 4-part chronological, and this setup is extremely easy to do. And of course, the beautiful people at Dalton will help you do that. You can set a start and an end date, and that actually gets recorded. You see it in the reports as well, so you know if they submitted late. They're trying to be sneaky. So we want to try and help Donna with her part 1. So we want to look at her worksheet. We say, okay, she's made 3 attempts. Ooh, not good, not good. Okay, and we can see here the progress. She's just not getting any better. So we want to look at the overview. This is pulling in now. And the reason I wanted Jamie to show you the hints from the student side before he signed off, these are the same hints. Notice here they're really vague. Something is wrong with invoice 731 and or how you posted it to the journal. We coach the students by saying, you know, make sure that you go back and look at your flow chart, check your numbers on the various documents that you needed for that transaction. But with our superpowers, we have the specific thing that it's looking for. So what about the sales journal is wrong? Here's the solution. Here's what the student put in. And then the grading point is just 1 or 0. You can sort it. And obviously if I sort it, it's all zeros right now. It doesn't matter. But you can sort it if they've only got a couple wrong so that those zeros pop up to the top. You also can sort by transaction number. Each assignment has about 20, 25 grading points. So not everything is graded. And of course, the students don't know which pieces are graded. So it's a little disconcerting for them to see all of my check figures match up, but I still got a 98% or whatever it might be. And this is why, because if you look at transaction number 1, there were 5 things for transaction number 1 that got graded because it's a big chunk. Okay, so we can coach the student that way, right? We have the internal controls here too, right? Something is wrong with the credit sale invoice. Well, they don't know what. They just might have the wrong the wrong authorizer, the wrong initials. On the forms where we require initials, a name, or a signature, the student can actually right-click there, and then they have to pick the right one. If it's initials, they have to click the initials, not the signature. Okay, so that's one way to coach the student. If we go back, and this is my favorite thing, when our IT team got this implemented, I was so excited. The view. Okay, so we were in activities before. If we look at the view, it says, are you sure? Because we are actually now going to simulate the student, and you can change their values here, which I've done on occasion, right? If we're sharing screens, this has worked really, really well during, Zoom land. And so if I'm the one sharing their screen and I'm showing them things, I'll just say, okay, yep, let's just put that in there, okay? You can't submit it for auto grading, but you can do everything else here. So you have to be careful. So yes, we want to view Donna's data. It takes a second. So we are doing everything the student does. So we have to select the assignment portion just like they do and click proceed. We now see all of the same things that Jamie just showed us. So we were looking before when Jamie was doing transaction number 2, we had looked at some of the journals. We had also looked at some of the ledgers. We can actually go in, and if we do, let's look at disbursements. So there is Donna's disbursements journal. Okay, and that's very specific to what the individual values that each student has. Okay, if we look at the receipts, same thing. Okay, there's the one for Branch College that Donna just did. So you can also coach the student this way, but this is my favorite thing. Notice up here where it says view solution. That was such a comfort to me because, as I said, each student has their own values. And how do I look at a transaction and know that this is one that was tweaked, right? How do I know which values each student is supposed to have? There's our answer. Each journal, each ledger, each financial statement, we can see the solution for that student. If you want to, you can save it, you can print it. There's not a lot of value in that, but it is something that you can do. Okay. Let me stop there. Is there any questions that I can answer so far? Okay, so again, that's looking at the student solution side. And we can view the students. We can go back to the student list. Okay, and now we're actually, looking at those individual students again. When you click on reports, you can do and I'll show you a cleansed version in a second, but you can do a detailed progress report. Okay, and so you can pick the various sections of your assignment that you'd like to look at, right, and download those. Or you can do a grade report. Okay. And this is all 4 assignment pieces in one. So let me quickly pull up the detailed progress report. So this is an actual report from some of my students last quarter. We have student 1's information here. Okay. Notice this is assignment number 1. So that's the first piece, the transactions from December 16th to the 22nd. And so here's what student 1 has done. Woohoo, they got 100% after only 3 attempts. Here's their latest timestamp. Here's the questions. And again, the solution for that particular student, what they entered, the points earned, the transaction number, and then what their hint would be. And then the same thing for student 2. The reason we set it up this way is so that you can do a little bit of analytics with it if you want to. You can actually go back and maybe you want to do a pivot table and see how many students just really don't get grading point number 9, right? They're really struggling with the AP ledger. Okay. So you have all of that great detail for every student in your class by assignment. And again, this is the 4-part chronological. So the grading report, again, a cleansed version of a partial report from my class last term. Excuse me. So here we can see the 4 parts, right? Assignment 1 and their score, the timestamp, it's red because it was late. And then the various pieces here, you can see they just kind of ghosted after that. The assignment pieces over here, right? It shows their best score if it's not the same thing as their final score, which is disappointing, but it happens, right? There's a couple where they didn't get better, and that's just information that you can use as well. So let me talk a little bit about how I use this. I do not use these percentages as is. I look at the students holistically. That's just kind of my nature. I try and take everything into account that this student did. So for instance, pick somebody here that didn't get 100%. Okay. So what I would do with this student 13, right? I would go back into the eSUA and I would say, okay, student 13, back to here. I would go back to my students list, find student 13. There's a search up here. So if you have a lot of students, you can search for that. But then what I would do is go into their activities here. And I would look at the various reports for that student, right? And so I would go in to their worksheet. And so I would look at their progress here. Did they use all 5 of their grading attempts? 5 is the default. I think you can set it to just 1. I think you can set it to whatever you want. But I think most people either do 1 or 5. And so I would look at, did they use all 5 of their attempts? Did they get better? Did they start in plenty of time to finish? All of those kinds of things would factor into the final grade that I gave them. And yes, that's a bit subjective, but to me, it's important to see how much they tried. And the other thing that's important to me is if they did one and got 70% and then didn't do anymore, I'm like, well, okay, they're content with 70%, then that is their grade. So that's how I use those grading reports. The progress report I haven't used a lot. I think mostly just because I haven't wanted to do analytics on it yet to see, how they're doing on the like individual questions or things like that.
Donna,
Okay, let me stop there.
I had
Yes.
a couple of things on the detail report you were just talking about. That was added after we did our fall beta testing. What it basically does is you
Yes.
don't have to then drill down on every single overview of every single student. You have it all in one place, so that if you're trying to address a
Yes.
bunch of different problems, that was the reason it was added. So we're hoping that it gives good
Yes.
information. The other thing
Yep.
is I've had several requests in the chat or the question to see if you would show again how to view the solution for each student. I think there's
Yes.
a concern about if all students have different, each one has different answers, how easy it is to help them if they need it. And part of that answer is the check
Yes.
figures and the hints will help them do that on their own. But if you had to dive in, how would you
Yes,
help?
exactly. And yep, and thank you. This to me is one of the biggest benefits of this. So you go to your student list and you click view, say you check your student, yes, okay. So if they're asking you about, oops, sorry, you have to pick the piece that you want. Okay, so if they're asking you about the purchases journal, okay, the hint said there's something wrong with my purchases journal, but I don't know what's going on because I did everything perfectly. Okay. So you simulate the student, you go to the piece that they're questioning, and eventually you'll get good enough where you can just look at it and say, oh, no, that should be that number. If it's one of the ones that are tweaked, though, that's going to vary by each student. And you'll also learn which values are tweaked and which ones are standard throughout all the transaction sets. But to see their solution in just about everything in here, if you go to the upper right when you're in that student view, you can click View Solution. Ta-da! And that's what it will show you. Okay, that's what it should look like when everything is completely done. And there isn't a download option on here. We'd kind of rather you didn't do that. Again, just to try and protect from students getting information they shouldn't. But you can save it or you can print to a PDF, either way. Other questions? Okay, I'm not hearing other questions. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention, there is a test bank for this. It's got approximately 120 quiz questions that are set up as a Canvas quiz. So I originally got them from Sarah B. Thank you, Sarah. I'm not sure where they came from before that, but Sarah B gave me a Word document that had all of these wonderful questions in it. And so I had one of my students put it into a Canvas test bank. And Arm Dalton folks can get you that as well. It's not available on the site yet,
Well,
but they can send you that.
The quiz questions that I'm thinking of are in the instructor resources for the hard copy eSUA. I have to double check to see if they're in the eSUA.
I also set those up that you can do it as a quiz on the ADR site separate from the eSUA. So you can go to the ADR site and set it up as a quiz there too.
Okay. What I did with mine is I took the test bank and I just set it up as a random, you can set up a quiz to pull X number of questions randomly. And I think I just made them do 20 questions out of the 120 or so that are there. And it's on the reference material. Sorry, I should clarify that. It's on all of the things in the reference manual. Because otherwise they don't read it. Let me put my I'll put my email in the chat since we are running out of time.
Donna, and I think if we have some time for people who are still interested in hearing from people who've used it already, we can open the floor for that too, if there's no specific questions for the author team or for Armin Dalton. But we do have some people online who have used it in the fall and then again in the spring, and some new ones in the spring, and I'm sure they would be willing to answer your questions.
I'll answer a question that I'm sorry, go ahead. I was
No,
going to
go
answer a
ahead,
question
Donna.
that I saw in the chat. Okay. Lisa has asked, does the system automatically assign different numbers to each student, or do you set it to do that? That's an option. You can have, which I did the first time I taught this, you can have the students have all the same answers. It's just a setup option. You don't have to do anything for it.
Let me add to that, though, that each different course is, I mean, each of you would have different numbers. So if you selected, let's say in your class, you selected to have all the students in the class have the numbers, those numbers would still be different than if Sarah went through and had opened up their course. So the numbers are unique per class, at least at minimum.
Yes, thank you. So this is not going to show up on Chegs or Course Hero because every class is different, and within that, every student can be different as well. Thanks for clarifying, Jamie.
Donna, just I've had a couple of questions too, that you don't have to have it that way. You can have everybody have the same one if you'd like. So it's an instructor choice.
Absolutely. And
It's also an instructor choice, I believe, to give hints. The check figures are always going to be there, just like the check figures we have in the regular eSUA that are in the instructor's guide. But the hints you can decide whether to show. And I do have a question that would be appropriate for people who've used it. It says, I'm curious about how often an instructor has to show the solution to help the students. That may mean that the students can't figure it out by looking at the hints. You know, there is a delicate balance there. We don't want to tell them, you put in the wrong number of cartons of footballs. But out of those who have used it, how often did you have to actually go into the view solution versus having the students rely on the hints and the check figures to figure it out themselves? Whoever wants to jump in.
Can I make a comment to the group?
Yeah, if somebody wants to jump in, that's fine. Go ahead, Sarah.
So, hi.
Good to hear from you.
So I missed some. I'm having my Wi-Fi installed today, so my apologies. But I was going to talk about how much help you give the students. And one of the things that my TA, Gabriella, came up with was in the instruction, she said, before you ask a question of Professor B, you need to go to the reference materials. You need to put a question in the discussion board on Canvas. So there's these steps that they must go through before they go to either Gabrielle or I. They have to try and find the answer themselves. And we frame it in the way that we say, when you're working in an accounting firm, you're going to have to look and do research on your own to find the answers to questions. And we're going to have you go through these steps before you go to somebody and ask them for the answer. And I thought that was pretty effective. Gabriella, I don't know if you're still on the call, but did you want to comment on that? How well it worked? Doesn't sound like she's here.
I don't think she's on any longer.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, so that's what, so I make students go through these steps, and, you know, it teaches them how to look things up, but also kind of relieves, you know, all the questions from us. But I've always struggled with how much help you get if somebody, you're going to have 2 or 3 students that are just, everything is wrong. They have like 10 or 15 errors in there, and you just kind of have to ask yourself, you know, what level are you going to, of help are you going to provide?
Agreed. And Pam is kind of saying the same thing in the chat. Pam says her connection is cutting in and out. She has never shown the students the solution. She uses a questioning method. And that's what I do too. Like I said, it works really well during Zoom. They can be sharing their screen and I can have their solution up. And I'll say, okay, so, you know, how did you calculate that? Where did that number come from? Who signed that? Was that on the flow chart that way? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I use Zoom all the time for helping the students. So I do have their solution up on one screen for me. They are sharing theirs. And I can just kind of talk them through it and let them find it in flowcharts and all of that. There are some students where I have to spend a significant amount of time, but I find the majority of students can really work from those hints and the check figures.
I would also echo not showing them the solutions itself. I found it to help me very quickly identify their point where they're off, because when you're answering multiple questions or running multiple classes, having to dig into somebody and completely retrace all their steps can be very time consuming. So it let me, on a quick drop of a hat, find where they're wrong. And then that meant I could go pull up the right reference page with them or guide them through the correct reference page to look at, going back to the transaction list to look at what steps was there, going back to the flow chart to look at what was provided there, and help them find where their error was at, help guide them to their error.
Carrie has a question about the response that the students have had toward the eSUA and the SUA.
I think no matter whether they do it on a piece of paper or they do it online, the first few hours they struggle, but after they get used to it, they're fine. But I don't think it makes a difference which way you're doing it.
Yeah, and Pam echoed that in the chat. Joanne said, I bet we could come up with top 10 errors. We probably could. In fact, when I'm introducing it to the students, I do tell them that there's a video that takes them to the entirety of the first transaction, click by click. And it was one of my former students who's amazing. And so she went through, right? And so the first transaction is one of the hardest ones. And so if they do that, that helps immensely. The second transaction isn't a difficult one. They just have to remember, to figure out, oh, why did they send us a smaller amount than what they owed? But the transaction itself is relatively simple to enter. But as they go through it, they do seem to pick it up pretty quickly. I guess to add to that, I've had very few students express frustration about the navigation of it. Yes, there are a lot of moving pieces, and it's even doable on a laptop. I usually do it on a laptop, and I only have one decent sized screen now, but they rarely say that that's what they're frustrated about. They get frustrated about the hints, right? Something is wrong with this invoice. Well, what's wrong? That's what they have to figure out. The navigation doesn't seem to be an issue after the first couple transactions.
And I think you'll spend more time up front as they get going, and it gets less and less time, right? And then you have some students who just never catch on. But I don't, so the amount of time you spend depends upon if your students wants to ask you questions, because I have some students will never ask me questions, and I have some students who go the opposite way, ask questions every step. So you're trying to find that balance. So, but I think it does require less and less time as you go on with the project.
Videos from
until they get to the year end.
So I created a couple of videos to walk them through the journals and the internal controls in there, and walk them through a couple sample documents on understanding the document references, because students were losing points because they wouldn't do just the red numbers on the references. They would put, some sort of prefix on it. So just with a couple of hints like that up front, saved so much time on both grading and helping them figure out their errors.
Donna, we did have some questions. I just wanted to reiterate some professor or instructor choices. Just like the hard copy SUA, you have the choice of assigning it a cycle approach or chronological. And so if you prefer one over the other, we've got you covered. Then once you choose that approach, you can do it as one project, which has about 100 grading points. So they do everything at once and submit everything at once, or you can do it in 4 assignments. And those 4 assignments will mirror pretty closely to the assignment sheets that are in the current hard copy instructor guide too. So you would do sales and cash receipts transactions as assignment 1, purchases, cash disbursements as assignment 2, Assignment 3 would be the month-end payroll or payroll and month-end procedures, and then 4 would be the year-end. So we've tried to make it as friendly as we could if you're used to the regular hard copy.
And all of those assignment setup options still have all of the options for everybody has the same transaction set within your class, or you can have everybody have a different set of values. And that's all seamless. Those are all just things that you click when you're setting up the course. Which transaction set do you want? How many components, right? Do you want the one submission, or do you want the 4? Do you want all the students to have individual values or all the same, right? It's all just clicking through setups.
I'm glad you said that too, Donna. I forgot to say that we do have transaction list B as an option, which that has 31 transactions. So I don't like to do that one when I was doing testing. I prefer the one with 20. So if you're using this for an AIS course, I would recommend the shorter. You know, the longer version is good for maybe an intermediate class where you want a little more practice with some maybe more difficult transactions. That's just, I don't teach, but that's just my advice.
Well, I'll have to give you an opposing opinion. I love B, and I think it makes my students think a lot more than they think on otherwise. But my class was always taught at the end. My AIS class was taught on their last semester, not last semester, but their last year of the program. So they've gone through most of the accounting already. But if you really want your students to be challenged, B is a more challenging option.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point though, Jamie. My students, we have 3 intermediate accounting classes. And so my students tend to take my class at the same time as their first or second intermediate. So I think that they even struggle with the year-end transactions. Month-end aren't too bad, but the year-end, creating the financial reports is very difficult for them because they don't have all those intermediates. I also do mine at the beginning of my class so that they see everything. Well, and then also too, I kind of joke, but it's kind of true. They see all the transactions, they understand the processes. When we get to some of the other things that we do, like SAP and Excel, they know now what an invoice is or a purchase order is. But I tell them too, this is the hardest thing we're going to do in this class. And so by the end of the term, when we're all really tired, we're not doing the hardest thing. But I like it because it sets that foundation. And then when they're doing their evaluations, they aren't still mad at me. I'm just kidding.
Well, I'll tell you, the eSUA is one of those things that the students are really mad when they do it, but I get a lot of compliments 2 or 3 years later when they write me back. Boy, I'm glad I went through that.
Actually, no, I mean, and I'm joking. I don't want to throw people off. I honestly don't have people upset. They do get a little frustrated, like we were saying before, with the first few transactions, but it's not, you know, I hate this thing, I can't do it. And maybe they just don't tell me that, but I just don't get that vibe from anybody.
I don't really either. It's just the it is a pretty long project, you know, and the students. So it's a pretty challenging project for the students, and so they get annoyed at it a little bit because of the time. But I have never had a student really tell me, "Gosh, this was a waste of my time." It's more of, I can't be lazy.
Students tell me they get jobs from this because they understand the terminology, they go into an interview, they sound good, they understand how it goes. So I get good feedback. It's frustrating, but I get good feedback and they all think it's worthwhile doing. So
yeah, I agree.
I had a student in my class this term who was working part-time as an AP clerk, and she even chimed in during class, this is so realistic. I mean, this is like what I do, but I use this, I don't remember what software she uses, it was industry specific. She said, but I use this software and it hides everything. And so I didn't even know that that's what I was doing. I was like, yes. Thank you, Chloe. Yeah, they do tend to really like it.
I'd actually like to add something going back to course creation and the transaction list. and being able to select the alternatives. There's an option when you're setting up the course, whether you're using our QuickBooks text or not. And I've told a few people, if they want the exact same numbers that are in the hard copy eSUA, even if they're not using the QuickBooks, just to select yes, because then if you select yes at QuickBooks, you're then able to choose transaction list A, main, or alternative 1, 2, 3, and 4. So those are the exact transaction lists that are in the 10th edition eSUA.
That can be helpful.
You still
if you
can't go
have-
back and forth between the, I'm sorry.
No,
I just want to
kidding.
clarify because I get this question all the time. You still can't go back and forth, like have some students do the paper version and some students do the electronic version though, right?
Well-
You have to pick one or the other because they're
Well, I think
different.
Misty, you had students do that, but we just you had to do what Jennifer was just talking about, right?
Right. So when I did it, it was still the same percent of the overall course grade. The month end and year end, there's a couple of steps different with paper to eSUA, very minor, more of the footing, cross footing they have to check for. Really the biggest part was I just, it was the same percent of their grade and we ran it like I'd run paper, and the ones that were on eSUA, we ran like I'd run eSUA. I'm not sure if that fully helps on your question. Let me know if you have a specific question on it otherwise.
Wow. Oh, that's great.
I would recommend trying to do it in one way or the other, so that as an instructor, you don't have to switch back and forth. But if you're wanting to move into it as soon as possible, then I definitely say it's doable to do.
I think if I remember correctly, the only reason we had done that with Misty is because she was online, but she had some students who were international and could not get the hard copy eSUA, so they did the e-version.
Correct. We jumped on the e-version with the international students. Mm-hmm.
I used to offer my students the choice too. I only had one in the whole, I think I've only had one that actually ever took the option to do it manually. But I
Did they
didn't
say why?
I
I'm just curious.
say why they didn't do it manually. Oh, because of all the footing and cross footing. It takes in my class, it was taking about 15 hours longer to do it manually than it was doing it electronically.
So why did the one person opt to do it manually then?
I have no idea.
Oh, just curious. Yes.
But this entire interface was based on Jamie's workbook, student version and a professor version. And the professor version graded the student version. So kudos to him for being able to make this convert to a cloud-based delivery. So we're really excited about it. Are there any other observations from people who have used it that any tips and tricks or anything you'd like to pass along?
I just think this really has been great because it's helped significantly with virtual. We do offer our AIS class virtually, and we were having to have students mail in their manual packets. So as virtual course instruction, it's very, very helpful. Even like, yes, with COVID having hit, it was even better timed to be able to get this product. But it's been very great for class, on-campus class, but very, very excellent for virtual classes. And like Jennifer said, I used it with international students, and I think that's just a really great asset moving forward, that I don't need to be concerned about where they're located on their mailing times for their packets.
Don't see any other open questions in the Q&A, but anything else that anybody wants to ask? Well, the one thing about Armin-Dalton is we are very small, and we like to think of ourselves as small and nimble. But so if you have a question, we can walk you through, do a separate Zoom meeting with anybody who wants to see something more specifically. Just contact the office.
Yep, and I'm happy to answer questions too. You can either contact the office and they'll connect you with me. I did put my email in the chat. Always happy to help.
Yeah, me as well.
Any other questions? I think we're good to go. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It was wonderful to see so many people here. I really appreciated that, and everybody else who's commented in the chat, or people who joined as panelists. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your support.
Appreciate your time. Please call us with any questions.